Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this conversation on what the future of work will look like, hosted by the European University of Rome and organized together in cooperation with the Employment Standards Office of the Qatar Financial Center. Let me begin by thanking my colleague speakers, Georgia Libera-Finstad, Research Fellow in Occupational Medicine at the University of Florence and collaborator at the Business and Health Lab of the European University of Rome, Gabriele Giorgi, Associate Professor of Organizational Psychology at the European University of Rome, as well as Susan Bazian, Najat El-Mahdi, and Matthew Walker, whose great work and commitment made this webinar possible. Now, talking about future work, saying the last year has changed us and the world of work would be definitely an understatement, because the pandemic was a real revolution, which also impacted the way we work and live. And like all revolutions, it's not easy to navigate. And as leaders, we have the responsibility to ensure that our workforce during this transition will remain diverse, inclusive, motivated, and productive. And while we thought that remote work was there to stay, big companies such as Apple and Google have already announced that they work their employees in the office, back to the office in the next coming weeks. Now in Qatar, with the 80% of the workforce already in the office, we're still trying to understand whether hybrid work will really be the new normal. And today, the aim of our conversation is to share some reflections and also good practices that can inspire us in designing hybrid work models that can really work for our different organizations and the different needs of our organizations and workforce. Because of course, there is no one size fits all. And if we get hybrid right, our employees will keep engaged, will be productive, agile, and of course, our businesses will flourish. But let's think about what we have learned thanks to the pandemic, during which we all had to implement a new operating model in a rush without time to think, to plan, to respond to the challenges, unpredictabilities, urgencies of COVID-19 pandemic. And in my opinion, what we really learned definitely is that human capital is the most important asset of any organization. And leaders during the pandemic, to support their workforce, had to change completely their approach, their perspective. They had to redefine their expectations towards people working from home. They had to trust more, delegate more, give employees the freedom and autonomy to decide when to work, how to accomplish the goals, the permission to make mistakes, and to manage their own tasks in a flexible way, also due to the different commitment we all had in our home spaces. And also managers changed their role and couldn't be focused on working hours, but rather on outcomes, on results. And this allowed also leaders to nurture the basic needs of any human being: autonomy, sense of purpose, sense of belonging, sense of accomplishment, which seems to be very much needed also during this transition from hybrid work, from remote work to hybrid work. But I have a question for you. Are we sure that employers and employees want the same thing? And it seems that they do not. And while employers have the need to reestablish a kind of normalcy, to regain a sense of control, employees, despite the difficulties they have encountered during working from home, they enjoy the flexibility and seem very reluctant to go back to pre-pandemic working norms. So unfortunately, we don't have many answers, but rather many questions. And how can we really match our employees' needs? How can we balance the business needs with individual needs? And how can we maintain a sense of belonging among the workforce and communicate effectively when only part of our workforce will be in the workplace, while the remaining part will still be working remotely. It seems that hybrid work is more complicated, more complex than the remote one. And while part of the research still focuses on the need of leaders to sit with their employees, to talk to their employees, but mostly to listen to their employees and design together hybrid models that can work for both. There is a recent research from Harvard Business Review from Nicholas Bloom, who is a professor of economics at Stanford University, and also author of the article, "Don't Let Your Employees Pick Their Work from Home Days," who raises a very interesting and controversial question. How much choice should our employees have in this matter, in choosing their work from home days, their new work arrangements? And he also raises two concerns. The first of which is related to inclusion, because although remote workers are used to participate to virtual meetings, employees at home can see glances or whispering in the virtual meetings without being really able to understand what's going on in the room. They miss their interactions with their colleagues, the after meetings catch up, grabbing a coffee with a colleague, and therefore they feel excluded, which has an impact on their sense of belonging. And the second concern is related to diversity, the risk to diversity, because research shows that female employees with family responsibilities want to work from home around 50% more than their male colleagues. And they are truly concerned that this will have an impact on their career progression. And actually, their concerns are supported by another research showing that work from home employees had a 50% lower rate of promotions compared to their office colleagues, which shows that by allowing employees to pick their own work from home days may be a very, could contribute at least to a diversity crisis, where single men might show up in the office the entire week and rocket up the firm, while female employees with family responsibilities, all employees with family responsibilities, but mostly female employees who have already been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, would be held back. And this would be definitely both a diversity loss, but also a legal time bomb for companies. But these are not the only implications of the hybrid work model. And I now leave the floor to Georgia Libera-Fistad, who will share with us some reflections on the challenges and opportunities of hybrid work. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So in the first place, I would like to thank Lujan Jani for the introduction and all our speakers for being here and for sharing their valuable experiences. I would also like to thank the Qatar Financial Center and the European University of Rome and Professor Georgie as well for having me today as a speaker. So my name is Georgia Libera-Fistad, and I'm a research fellow in occupational medicine and a collaborator at the European University of Rome, as Luija mentioned before. And what I'll do today is a brief introduction on the key features of hybrid work. So let me share my presentation. Okay, you should see it in a moment. So my short introduction will be on the pre-pandemic data, on the concepts of teleworkability, or how to determine if a job can be done remotely, the possible advantages and disadvantages of the hybrid model, and I would like to talk about a new occupational safety and health risks with a focus on a new Technostress construct. So the terms telecommuting and teleworking were coined by Jack Niels in 1976, but estimates prior to 2020 indicate a scarce diffusion of this work practice. And this is mainly because of a cultural paradigm. There's a culture which is connected to the physical presence. So employers and managers are concerned with topics like performance evaluation or the monitoring of workers' activities. And even though flexible ways of working are associated with numerous advantages, pre-pandemic data show that only 1 in 20 workers reported teleworking on a regular basis. So what COVID-19 pandemic did was force us to address how to make hybrid work suitable. And this is because also, as we can see from multiple surveys, the workforce itself is demanding a blended model for the future. For example, we have a recent report of the Boston Consulting Group, according to which 40% of employers envision a hybrid and remote working model for the future, while China is already a leading indicator with 9 out of 10 employees already using a hybrid model. Regarding the possible advantages and disadvantages of the hybrid model, we can see in the first place that there's a lot of benefits for performance. For example, there's an interesting research of Bloom and colleagues of 2015. They analyzed the performance of 16,000 of Chinese workers during the course of 9 months. And at the end, the results highlighted 13% of performance increase for workers from home. So I think this is a really interesting point, as well as work-life balance. And this is because we can have both better and worse balance. And this mainly depends on several factors. For example, workers have more flexibility, more autonomy, they have less commuting time, and so they can better manage their different activities. But at the same time, working from home entails the possibility of always being connected, always being accessible, so possibly leading to conflicts and overlaps between the different domains and the different roles. At the same time, working from home and the hybrid work model can lead to more opportunities, for example, for people with disabilities who may not be able to physically reach the workplace, and for caregivers who can better manage their different activities. So we also have a wider pool of talents for companies on the other side. We should also consider the possible obstacles or the possible risks associated with the hybrid model. In the first place, we have 2 macro categories, which are ergonomic risks on one side and the psychosocial one, like, for example, working in one position over a long period of time, visual fatigue, or on the other side, we have the new concept of technostress, which I will discuss in a moment. Another important factor is associated with the social relationships. Obviously, this is one of the greatest challenges. So we should ask ourselves, how do we spread the norms and values that are usually absorbed during daily interactions? And at the same time, I think daily interactions are useful for sharing thoughts and opinions. And so, according to research, there may be a reduction in the sharing of knowledge and also creativity. So I think this is one point we should address. And also, workers have career concerns. And this is because they fear that their efforts are not visible to their managers. And so there may be a certain point concerns regarding the visibility and the career. I'd like to briefly introduce the concept of teleworkability, and it's because obviously not every work and not every job can be done remotely. So Fernanda, Macias, and colleagues developed a classification, and Sostero and colleagues used this framework to define teleworkability. And teleworkability mainly depends on the amount of physical activity that is required. And this is because even if robotics is making great strides in this, manual labor is hardly done remotely. And so they developed 2 indices, which are technical teleworkability and social interaction index. And social interaction provides information, useful information, because social tasks can be carried out remotely, but there's a decline in quality. And this decline in quality is usually proportional to the amount of interaction that is missing. For example, as in the case of psychotherapists, we could think. And thanks to these indices, Cicero and colleagues analyze more than 130 occupations around Europe. And as we can see, we have teleworkability by sector, and obviously sectors like agriculture, construction, or manufacturing have the lowest level of teleworkability. While I don't know, information and communication, education, and financial services are the most teleworkable. But I think that the most interesting data is the discrepancy between actual teleworking and the potential teleworkable jobs. And this is where I think the future of work should concentrate and should focus in order to reduce this gap in the future. So finally, I'd like to highlight the possible occupational safety and health practices and risks associated with the hybrid model and the concept of technostress. So technostress was first introduced as a term by Craig Broad in 1984 to define the inability to adapt or cope with new computer technologies in a healthy manner. And it can be defined also as any negative impact on attitudes, thoughts, behaviors, or body physiology that is caused either directly or indirectly by technology. But what's important to understand is that it's not technology itself that is stressful, but certain features and aspects related to its use. And these same features could be worsened by the hybrid model and remote working. For example, we have information overload, data smog, or information fatigue syndrome, which basically defines the continuous information flow that we can have thanks to technology. But on the other side, workers are not able to process all this amount of information. And this can lead to high performance expectations and a sense of urgency, for example. We also have excessive multitasking. This is because workers have to pay attention to multiple tasks at the same time. Just think about emails. They have to interrupt the main flow of activities in order to answer to multiple questions and multiple requests. We also have role conflict. For example, if a technical problem arises and the worker doesn't know what to prioritize, or if new technologies are implemented and training opportunities are not provided. We obviously have work-life balance issues. As I mentioned before, this is one of the greatest challenges of the hybrid model. Technology makes employees feel indiscriminately accessible, can lead to a culture of always on work environment, and to phenomena like inability to switch off or fearing of missing out, and also a form of workaholism that is defined as techno addiction. We have also another stressful factor, for example, is the pace of change, as I mentioned. So if new technology are implemented in the workplace. And finally, I would like to highlight that we, as European University of Rome and Professor Giorgi's team, we are developing a new questionnaire, which is aimed at analyzing and evaluate all the characteristics related to the use of technology in the workplace. So we are developing the stress questionnaire, which at the moment is composed of 15 scales. So we have its usability and usefulness, reliability, technology, self-efficacy, role, multitasking, job control, job demands, the pace of change, work-life balance, the privacy and monitoring of the workers' activities, which is another factor related to the use of technology, employability, the perception of employability, supervisor and colleague support, so the domain of virtual relationships, employee involvement and training. So we are now in the pilot phase of the validation process, and we obtain encouraging results for the future. As so to the best of our knowledge, this is the first Italian questionnaire, which will cover all the aspects related to technostress. So I will now give the floor to Professor Giorgi, Associate Professor in Work and Organizational Psychology, Director of the Advanced Training Course in Disability and Diversity Management and Business Coaching Psychology here at the European University of Rome. Professor Giorgi is also author of hundreds of publications at the national and international levels and editor for many and several special issues on the future of work. So, Professor Giorgi,
Okay, thank you very much, George, and thank you very much, Luigia, for these wonderful presentations. Actually, this is a very important topic, and I agree with your point of views. There are lights and there are some darkness area. So I will introduce with this presentation the post-pandemic workplace, the hybrid model with the business and corporate overview, because my approach is very scientifically based, but also at the European University of Roma, we have collaboration with many companies. You can see there are some that are reported in the slide. We always work together with companies for our research. And as Giorgia Libera introduced, we actually develop many special issues. Two special issues were focused on future of work. So we collaborate, you can see here, 7 special issues with more or less 300 universities around the world. So this is our expertise on work and organizational psychology. So companies around the world are looking to the post-COVID future by moving towards a hybrid business model. Apple, for example, will use a new hybrid work model that requires employees to work at the office and at the same time in the virtual world. For example, there are also other companies like UniCredit that has communicated the possibility for employees to return to the office on a voluntary basis by booking, for example, with an app. UniCredit, is a very famous Italian company. Cross-industry international data show that workers want to maintain actually the flexibility of the hybrid model. For example, a Prudential survey of 2,000 workers found that 87% of remote workers during COVID would like to continue working from home, while 42% of workers would seek another job instead of returning to the office full-time. So psychologically, I would say remote working for sure several advantages for worker. As Giorgia and Luisa said, increased flexibility, increased problem solving. There are some data also that show an increase in productivity, increasing in job satisfaction. However, also negative effects such as technostress might be underestimated at this time, especially at this time. And what are the advantages for companies? For sure, companies can rely on a larger talent pool and the adoption of a management model focused on goals and excellence rather than hours spent in the office. In this regard, for example, a recent report from the Boston Consulting Group shows that more than half of managers believe that their teams are more productive working remotely. Companies also need less space, which means significant cost saving in terms of space and supplies. And finally, companies can improve the image also thanks to the hybrid business model. As advanced by research, working remotely can affect up to 5% of the environment, social and governance score. However, we have to ask again, what is going to happen? What is going to happen, for example, to engagement, as Luisa said before, to diversity, to a weaker population at work, and especially in long term? So for sure, there are also obstacles in the hybrid model, and I'm going the next slide to focus on this matter. It is possible to summarize the common concern according to the 5 Cs: control, culture, collaboration, contribution, and connection. The control aspect refers to how to monitor employee activities without physically seeing him, fin them as employees perceive that they cannot monitor employee performance appropriately outside the company premises. Culture refers to all those socialization process that allow the establishment of a strong corporate identity. The aspect linked to collaboration concern the way which teams interact both geographically and temporally. As for the contribution, companies fear that they will not be able to evaluate the merit of the employees without their physical presence in the office. However, is it possible to use a performance evaluation model focused on the quality of the result and the objectives achieved, taking in account the limitation of specific tasks, of course. Finally, the connection aspect concerns the isolation of remote employees, as also Giorgia Libera pointed out, with possible negative repercussions on emotional and social skills. We actually, maybe we can have a kind of risk of hikikomori effects, it's kind of really long-term isolation after that's been very harmful for the psychological health. We now focus on the hybrid model that you can see is located at the center and can be divided into alternating on-site, on demand, and connected remote. In the alternating on-site model, employees alternate days or weeks on-site. In the on-site on-demand model, employees go into the office only for specific tasks. And in the connected remote model, employees resign with 3 hours at the office to enable once a month attendance for affiliation or other purposes. So actually, really, there is a multiple hybrid model just now, and we have to focus, of course, a lot of research on it. Now we try to find some solution, I would say. There is, of course, a complex framework. So analyzing the post-pandemic situation, we can find a really complex framework that I would say create a bridge between business and health. If properly managed, the set of emerging circumstances suggests the possibility of greater harmony between business and health. Business imperatives, which are continuity, safety, sustainability, are connected with individual variables linked to human skill, inclusion processes, diversity, job design, and the new and re-engineered business problem. So we strongly suggest business and health. Actually, our university already had this laboratory, business health, since 5 years ago, but after the pandemic, we strongly encourage the importance of studying the relationship between business and health. The new normal actually appears like a mixture of several variables. Indeed, in the future of work, it will be necessary to balance business and health objectives. Finding the compromise between digital work and office work, business continuity and business expansion, diversity is very important, and we have to pay attention also maybe to the risk of homogeneity, because we are always the same, no, in front of a laptop. And also with the balance between innovation and tradition. So again, as we open this webinar, we have some solution, but we have a lot of questions. So I guess we will go on maybe in the future to studying and to focusing on the future of work. And I think it's very important, as today we are together with the Qatar Financial Center, the bridge between universities and associations and companies. So, Luisa, I will let you.
Thank you. Thank you, Giorgia Libera and Gabriele, for this interesting reflection on what research suggests to strike the balance between business needs and human needs in the workplace. Because as we said before, human capital is the most important asset for any organization. So let's listen now to some experiences. I'm pleased to introduce you Susan Bazian, who is office manager at the FIFA World Cup Qatar. And she has been living in Qatar for more than 31 years. So she has an extensive experience in the field. And Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luigia, for your introduction, and thank you for inviting me to take part of this very interesting and valuable workshop and presentation. Most of the stuff that was highlighted by Georgia and the professor are all valid points, and in the experience of us for FIFA World Cup Qatar, I joined in July 2019, and the company just has been established. As you know, it's a joint venture between FIFA and the host country. So it's an event company, and it was the main challenge that we had at the time when March 2020, the government announced 100% remote working, was the hiring of staff, because we were on the go. We were constantly looking to hire staff because the event was like in 2 years' time. So immediately the management took the decision to remote join. So we immediately moved our sort of style of hiring from physical being in the office. We immediately moved to remote hiring. And we did remote sort of inductions, IT inductions. We remotely had the HR induction explained, and we stayed connected throughout until September of 2020, when the visas opened and we were all able to mobilize all the team members that were remotely joined. So also it was very challenging. We immediately at the time started WhatsApp group, 2 WhatsApp group to keep the team connected. One was informal WhatsApp group, and the other was a strictly business WhatsApp group to keep the information going, because we thought the WhatsApp was much quicker than the emails, and staff were available on WhatsApp for immediate updates, changes in government's policies and procedures. And it has all the top management up to the managing director and the chairman. So all those were on the business group, business WhatsApp group, and we kept another informal to keep the staff motivated. We made some team activities, cooking challenges. We did a run from Doha to Zurich, our head office. People shared their running, their walking, cycling, all kinds of activities. And wherever we reached, we posted something about that city that we reached at. So we stayed connected throughout the remote working. Now, when we were back to the hybrid schedule, I think back in August of 2020, the government announced 30%, and staff really loved it. And I can see now, because really, I think we will go with if management approves, we will definitely continue to have the hybrid schedule. It's good because you have a combination of two. You have the ability to work from home and get organized, because working from home also, it's an organization skill. You need organization skill to be able to work from home with minimum distraction, staying focused. So this working from home taught a lot of people to be organized. Many people were not able. They thought that they will never be able to work from home. They have to work in the office to be able to function and to perform. But that pandemic taught many people to stay focused regardless where you're working from. You could be working from a kitchen table. You could be working from your living room. So, and I think it proved well for us. The performance we felt at the beginning, because of different types of people and different types of character, at the beginning we found some staff felt less important. Some staff felt, oh, I don't see my manager, he's not asking, because of the, like sort of the level of staff. But immediately we reacted and we kept them engaged, and we had to communicate and interact. Even we had to do all these with the chiefs, all the chiefs, some teams, present seminars or whatever, teams meeting to keep them interacting with the highest level. And it worked, so I think, in my opinion, if hybrid schedule continues, it's definitely more better for the staff, because they know that they're trustworthy. They feel like, oh, I don't have to come 8 to 5, from 8 to 5, 5:01, I'm out of this place. It keeps them more engaged. They feel more valuable and they feel more trustworthy. And I think it needs time for the employer also to trust, to make sure that the employee is performing. And, we do this evaluation, and I think they should continue. And so those are the things that what we did during. IT was not a challenge for us because we work with laptops, and we take our laptops every day. It's according to the policy that we have, the admin policy for business continuity. We say you have to carry your laptops every day at the end of the day. So we stayed connected. Teams also was in place already, because we were using it for our meetings with head office in Zurich. So it wasn't something that we have to quickly install or educate the staff on. Most of the IT was not a challenging. The only challenge we had was maybe with internet connection at individual houses. Some of them with low internet capacity, but they immediately upgraded and they were able to be up to speed. So I think, I don't know, but it depends on the government. Also we follow government directions somehow. It's a joint venture between a government entity and a private sector. So most of the time we follow the government. If government say 100% back to work, then we have to adapt that. Also, in addition, why hybrid schedule worked for us, because of capacity. We are growing so fast, and the plan was maybe to have 350 or 400 employees by end of 2021, while the space doesn't take more than 278 or 280, the current 5 floors. So I think that's a good point for us, because we can hot desk. I can tell the team, for example, a certain team, you have 20 seats, you manage them. I can tell the other team, I can give you 50 seats, you manage them, and so on. So we don't have to rush and incur additional expenses and, looking for additional space. Also, it will save cost on IT, it will save cost on consumables, as indicated in the presentation. It's really a good plan. Now, the percentage, whether hybrid 80, hybrid 50, that will depend on the teams. Although we feel like sometimes being in an event company, maybe the staff needs to really be together, because it's all about the event, like sort of when they watch a football match, they have to be together. But we are learning for their safety until, the pandemic, we don't know when it's going to end. It might continue till maybe mid-2022. I don't know. We hope that it will end by 2021. But even if it ends, a hybrid schedule is a very wise and I think a good solution. It might impact other office spaces, like you have lots of retail in commercial buildings. If companies decide to keep their downsizing or keeping the hybrid schedule in place, it will have an impact on the commercial and the retail space that is out there in Qatar.
I couldn't agree more, Suzanne, and thank you for emphasizing also the need to strike the balance between both needs and the need for flexibility, but also the importance of technology in dealing with this new reality. Now, if you allow me, I will introduce Matthew Walker, who is partner in Doha and London office of Kellenel Gates and focuses his practice on construction, law, and dispute resolution. Matthew is also honorary secretary of the Qatar and QFC branch of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and he's going to share with us some lessons learned during the pandemic that hopefully can inspire us in creating workable hybrid models. Matt, the floor is yours.
Luigi, thank you very much, and thank you also to Dr. Giorgia Libera-Finstad and Professor Gabriele Giorgi for their very thoughtful and thought-provoking introduction into this topic. And I've already sort of started to take some of those ideas on board, and I'm going to propose a couple of additional comments for everybody to think about. So, as you might imagine, professional services firms are perhaps have been one of the beneficiaries in some ways of the hybrid model and how the hybrid working model has impacted the way in which we deliver our services. In some ways, we are already a technologically literate group of professionals working within a business, and in particular, we all had already a lot of the equipment that we needed in order to be able to continue to deliver our services. So in fact, and perhaps whisper this quietly, in all law firms, certainly law firms, I would imagine the accountancy firms as well, aren't whispering this quietly. And if you keep an eye out for their figures over the next year or so, you may be surprised to discover that for all professional services firms, they've had an extremely strong year in 2020 and 2021, largely because essentially the COVID pandemic on an impact in terms of the impact on productivity was very little. If anything, it enabled people to become more productive, to some extent depending on their particular focus in terms of the type of work that they do. So, we would perhaps see some disruption and some slowdown in certain types of M&A activity. Our real estate colleagues are going to have a very interesting 12 to 18 months as they essentially have to work out how to reposition what they do as in terms of a team and an area of practice, because there's no longer going to be, I don't think, the same level, intensity and level of large scale office and retail developments in large city centres, and they are going to have to work out how to kind of rebrand and remodel some of what they do in terms of their scope. Why do I say that? I think because certainly it's the perception of professional services firms that the COVID pandemic has essentially turbocharged what we already perceived to have been something that had begun to start to happen anyway, which was this concept of hybrid working. I think the reason that we have all become so familiar with the terminology and so quickly adapted to things like Zoom and Teams and what have you, is that because we were already, there was a beginning to be at the start of that process, even before the COVID pandemic, and all that COVID did was simply move the program forward by several years. So I think as I think both Giorgia and Gabriele have highlighted in their presentations, I think we are now going to have to become aware of different needs and different areas of concern that we have to watch out for in terms of how we continue to deliver our services. I think firstly, it is going to be, in a sense, a little bit more hyper-localized in terms of what needs are in any given location in which we provide our services. As you point out, Luigi, I'm perhaps quite well positioned to sort of comment on this because I see what our needs are and how we deliver our services in Doha, and then I also see what our needs are and how we deliver our services in London. And the two are not the same, and they're not going to develop in the same way. I think we perceive that, and that is, much of that is driven, again, like any professional services firm, how we deliver our services is fundamentally driven by our clients, what our clients expect, what our clients require, what our clients demand. And we have to be sensitive to that, and those are good, and not, of course, what one particular client needs, even in a city, might be different from what they require in a different city. So we have to be sensitive to that in the way in which we deliver our services. If I was going to sort of draw some broad brush themes, I think I would say that our perception is that in a market like Qatar, there is still a very high premium on face-to-face contact, and that personal face-to-face contact is a very important element of what we deliver as a law firm for our clients. And therefore, I think our perception is going to be that on Giorgio's sliding scale of 0 to 100, 0 being fully in the office and 100 being not, that we would be, perhaps closer to the, say, 25%, where we are mostly in the office, because that is what our clients expect. We're not going to be, I don't think any professional services firm is ever going to be 5 days in the office in the future. I just don't think that's going to happen. And I think that is a permanent change we have already seen introduced, because as you quite rightly say, every person in any organization has a life. They have family needs. I also think that law firms are going to see that we can start to deliver on environmental targets, which will become increasingly important, by ensuring that we're working from home rather than commuting. So that's a good example, I think, of where, in a market like Doha, we see a fairly high, maybe 3 days a week, 4 days a week presence in the office, but certainly that beginning to see that at least 1 or 2 days a week working from home. I think in a city like London, it's going to be a little bit different. I think we will see probably slightly more working from home than working in the office. And certainly we've already started to create a London office policy as to a return to the office. And I would say we're seeing most of the departments saying minimum 2 days a week in the office, but then with a bit of flexibility on top of that, depending on what is happening, and as always, whatever our client needs are. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the things that Gabriele said in his presentation, he listed 5 C's, and I'm going to give Gabriele another 2 C's to think about: coaching and culture. And particularly for a law firm, we see those 2 C's as absolutely critical to our decision making about how we implement a hybrid working policy going forward. I think the coaching aspect is especially important for us. We see that the lifeblood of any law firm is how we help to train and develop our junior team members. And our perception is our junior team members get the most out of co-working with their colleagues and also learning from the more experienced members of the team. And it is pretty difficult to do that in a really convincing and compelling way on a purely remote working model. So there has to be hardwired into the model that we put in place, that idea that senior members and junior members get to spend time together, so that us senior team members are fulfilling our requirement to coach and develop and train our junior members. So we see that as a really, really important part. And so that's inevitably going to mean we're going to need to be together and working together some of the time. In terms of culture, I think every professional services organization has that concept where we do need to have an understanding of what our esprit de corps is. What does it mean to be a lawyer at a law firm like K&L Gates? What are our values? What are the most important parts of who we are as a team and how we interact with each other and with our clients? And again, that creation of a firm and office culture, I think it is extremely difficult to do that in a purely remote setting. So again, that is going to be an imperative towards coming up with that really good workable hybrid model where we are spending time together every week, creating that culture. But as I think Gabriele correctly said, there are other requirements, other desires of the team, and they don't want to be in the office all the time because we have families, we have lives, we need to deliver. And being blunt about it, law firms we're driven by the numbers. We see the numbers in terms of productivity, in terms of profitability, and this has been a good year for us. We can see that people generally have replaced much of their commuting with billable work. Billable work means we can charge it to clients and we can become even more profitable. So that is, I think, certainly how professional services firms would react to the developments that we've seen over the last year in terms of hybrid working.
Thank you very much, Matt, for offering not only the perspective from the professional services, but also for adding the 2 C's. I totally agree with you that coaching and culture are 2 key elements. Maybe Gabriele might think to add them in his presentation. And now I'm very pleased to introduce you Najat El-Mahdi, who is an expert change consultant, certified coach, HR advisor with over 15 years of experience in global experience within various sectors, who is passionate with developing others. Najat will share with us some of the tools that help her and her organization navigate the remote work, and how those tools may be useful for us also to redesign these work arrangements in the post-pandemic workplace. Najat, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's been great to be here. It's been really interesting so far, and I've learned a lot. So I'd like to start with kind of what we found our challenges were, not dissimilar to how Suzanne was explaining and Matthew, but the technology. I work across the sector, actually in the financial sector. I'm not just one organization. So I found different organizations were ready, particularly in technology, and those that had the Microsoft Teams, and we had already the Citrix and the things that where we could already work remotely was much, much easier. The things that we hadn't anticipated with this pandemic was the line managers and being able to support them and being able to really understand, what do they need? Because yes, they're a line manager, but they're also people and employees going through exactly the same. So there was support extended there. And then the thing that really emerged for us, which is very immature, I think, or premature, I should say, in Qatar, is the employee well-being, the mental state of employees. And one of the things we responded to that with was to ask line managers and colleagues to just check in with the cameras on, with a coffee, making sure people were okay. And, we also believed that this is something that we can take forward. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I know time's of the essence, so I'll try and be quick. So our solutions were really to support the line managers, really to encourage them to look at how they can, support their employees going forward if they chose this hybrid model or working remotely. And we've really put the employee wellbeing at the forefront. For me now, employee wellbeing is not a nice to have, which it has been for a long time. It's almost the new DNA of HR. And I think it's something that we really should be thinking about with organizations. People are still suffering. We're still seeing things happening in the office, various things, and because of the pandemic and what's happening. So I think in terms of what we found and how we moved forward, the normal or the things that have already been touched on, there's nothing new there. We haven't found a magic tool to make this better for anybody, but we're learning and we have lots of questions. Hybrid working is not new. We all know it's not new. And I think the critical thing for me is that when we talk about hybrid working or working from home, I think that whole domestic responsibility that we had and we saw and we worked through in the pandemic probably isn't going to be there so much if we look at a culture of an organization or if we look at policy. So going forward, the children should be at school if you're a working mum, or, you don't have those kind of responsibilities. So I think that it's going to be quite different when we decide that if this is the way forward for us. I also think it always depends on the culture of the organization. Are the companies open to that? You know, we've seen here that we're straight back into the office as if nothing's happened. So, you know, what can we do? What can organizations do? And how can they make sure that they use something that's useful for them? But more importantly, is actually enabling the employees to be productive, because some, as you mentioned before, Dr. Georgia, some jobs just aren't working remotely viable. So we have to be clear on that. And we're also, the important thing for me, I'm an HR practitioner that's worked in the field for a long time. And I've always said, you know, policies are good. Yes, they're a direction, but it's always about the individual. You've got to speak to people. What do they want? What do employees look for? What works for one person is very different what works for another people. We've already seen people not wanting to return to the office. We're seeing eager beavers wanting to come back to the office. So why? And we have to question that and really have conversations and keep that line of communication open. I'm also intrigued as to why Google and Apple have announced that straight back into the office. And I think, you know, as on a high level, we're kind of going, well, what you're always the leaders in how we look to manage our employees. But I'm sure there's some underlying data that we haven't seen, and maybe they have their reasons for that. So I think in terms of moving forward for me and taking lessons learned from the pandemic, I'm looking at bringing employee wellness to the forefront of what we do, and also really supporting line managers to help them manage their employees more effectively if they're doing this hybrid model. And then really finally, is that the culture we want? You know, we already had flexible policies in place. Do we want to encourage this? Do we have that trust in the organization? So what culture are we really looking forward to changing or not? And that's something that we're going to be discussing. And I think also one of the things we have found, just like Suzanne's mentioned, is tapping into that global talent. You know, we've managed to work with some amazing people that we maybe not been able to before because of the fact that they didn't want to relocate here. So there's been some positives. It's an amazing learning opportunity for all of us. I'm very excited to see what the future of work really is. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Najat. My biggest takeaway is that we don't really know, and we will figure out by trial and errors, by testing and learning. And I believe this is really the message today. Let's try together with our employees to test what really works for all of us, because as we said, well-being is no longer a nice to have. And it's not only a physical well-being, it's a mental well-being, and it's about the sense of belonging, the C about connections, that connection, that it's a very strong point that will keep our employees motivated, engaged, productive, because employees' well-being means business. So thank you, all of you. Thanks in particular to our speakers, but also to our attendees. Georgia and Gabriela, is there anything else you would like to add before we conclude our webinar?
I'd like to say that I definitely agree. I think we should keep a communication line open. We should consider the specific features of the context. So absolutely, we should consider where we are operating, what the specific needs of the specific workers are, and we should balance all the possible benefits and balance what the possible obstacles are, keeping in mind that they're not something that is not manageable. So I think probably learning by doing is the best way for the future.
I would like to thank you all for participation to this seminar, which was very, very interesting. I agree with your perspective. Coaching goals and culture are key points. I'm also director of business coaching psychology course, so I strongly agree with Matthew, definitely. And maybe I can conclude with a statement that focus on the importance on health and business. There are both imperatives, they are connected, and also psychological health is very important. Maybe in future we will talk about this topic, because of course health is very important in this period, and we have to consider also psychological well-being.
Thank you again, Gabriele. I couldn't agree more. Healthy employees mean healthy and sustainable business. And with this message, we conclude our webinar today. Thanking you again for your participation. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grazie a
Bye-bye.
tutti. Ciao.
Bye. Bye.